Alistair, thanks for coming on this week and taking some time for us.
That's my pleasure, James.
Great. Well, we had talked a little bit before the interview, and I just wanted to cover one of your latest pieces that you wrote, which I think is tremendous, and I'll certainly share the link below the video for all the viewers so they can go and read it. It was written Gold's Monetary Rehabilitation, and the subject of the article essentially is how the East, especially China and Russia, are moving towards potentially some pseudo gold standard in the years to come. And in it, you go through a case of why this is happening, how it's happening, etc. And then you even go into possible ways in which China may eventually create a Chinese gold bond issuance. So let's, I suppose, kind of step back and just take a big view of what's going on the macro level, especially with this in mind, I suppose.
Indeed. The whole bond idea basically is to give gold a yield. If you give gold a yield, then people are going to buy the bond and they're going to hang on to the bond rather than physical gold, which is actually what you want when it comes to monetizing gold. I think the background to this is it's very, very important actually, because the Western world over centuries has evolved to a point where it's done away with gold as money. It has done away with gold as backing for its money, and we're now in a situation where we've got fiat currencies which are backed by no more than the full faith and credit of the issuer. And, that's fine for most of us for a long time. And it's fine in the sense that government uses it as a means of hidden taxation and depreciates it over time. We don't mind that too much because they do it so slowly, we don't notice it, and also the other thing is we don't understand what's going on. But there is going to come a point where we do begin to understand. And in my view, the next credit crisis is going to be the beginning of that awakening. Now, the reason I say that is that when you get one of these periodic credit crises, the central banks have only one answer, and that is to flood the system with base money in the belief that they should stop, firstly, prices falling because they don't like deflation, and secondly, they need to rescue businesses which can't pay their debts so that unemployment doesn't rise. Now, and there's a third thing, which is actually probably more important than a lot in this world of banking, and that is that the banks are the piggy in the middle, and they're the guys who basically get squeezed in this. And the central bank basically rescues all the commercial banks. So that happens periodically. The last time was 2008-9. The time before that was 2001, 2, round about then. And you can go back and you can see that this happens time after time. It is a credit cycle. It is not a business cycle. The reason they say it's a business cycle is to blame the private sector. No. No. It is actually down to monetary policy and fractional reserve banking. It is a credit cycle. So why is this relevant to the introduction of a gold-backed currency? It's important because we saw on the last credit cycle crisis that the Fed on its own had to produce, if you like, blank checks. I estimated at the time that the potential total of those blank checks was around about $13 trillion. Now, not all that was drawn down, but we're talking huge, huge money. We're talking at that stage around about 90% of GDP. The Fed was going to just literally say, you want money, don't close your doors, we'll give you money. That's what happened. Guess what they're going to do on the next one? They're going to do exactly the same. But since the last crisis, the amount of debt around the world has actually increased. And we're looking at a figure now of, $240 trillion equivalent. It's something like that. It's gone up about 20%. And if you look at governments like the Italians, like the Greeks, like the Spanish, like the Americans, like the British, like the Japanese, what have the governments been doing? They've been using these very low interest rates to expand their borrowing even more. Mm-hmm. So the result, if you like, of the credit crisis that we had last time has been the production of yet more debt on top of debt that was never wiped out from the previous time and from the previous time from that.
So malinvestments weren't clean. We essentially just drew up global debt. I think it was 150 trillion around 2007, 8-ish. It's now 230, over 230 trillion. Yep. So that's 80 trillion added on.
Exactly. That is the point. So how much money does the Fed, does the Bank of England, does the ECB, does the Bank of Japan have to produce in order to keep the system going? I mean, it's going to be significantly larger than last time. But the problem is that the banks are already flooded with money. If you look at the total amount of money in circulation in America, and add on top of that the amount of bank reserves sitting at the Fed, you're looking at a figure of around about $13 trillion. Now, this is huge. And if you look at foreign portfolios in terms of dollars, there's probably another, 17, 18 trillion dollars worth of portfolio assets denominated in dollars held by borrowers. So putting all this together, you can see that we're in a situation where on the next crisis, if the Fed floods the system with money, which I think is a racing certainty, then you are going to get the beginning of the collapse of the dollar and all the other paper currencies, some of which are actually in a worse position, such as the euro. Mm-hmm. So, this brings us on to how on earth do we get out of this problem? There are two countries that can do that. One is Russia and the other is China. And they are planning to do it. We know they're planning to do it because China has been accumulating gold since it introduced the regulations appointing the People's Bank of China way back in 1983 to do so. There was a wonderful gold bear market which allowed the Bank of China to pick up gold in enormous quantities secretly without declaring it. Now, my personal view is that by 2002, it was clear that the People's Bank of China, on behalf of the government, had accumulated enough physical gold for it then to allow its people to begin to accumulate gold, because they were banned from owning it until that point. So the People's Bank of China then sets up the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And the Shanghai Gold Exchange has delivered something like a further 17 to 18,000 tons into the private sector's hands. And there's other evidence that the Chinese have been really going gung-ho on gold. Mm-hmm. They are now the largest miner in the whole world by a very long shot. And I'm sure a lot of that gold mining is subsidized and probably not economic in Western terms.
Right, they have their own gold mining army. It's like literally military. Yeah. It's amazing.
Exactly. And on top of that, the government has a monopoly on all the gold refining businesses. They take in doré from abroad, from places like Africa, from places like Mongolia, and they turn it into gold. Where does that go? I'm not too sure. I don't sit there working out the numbers because I don't really believe numbers too much. I try and work like on theory and hard facts rather than statistics. Sure. But it does seem to me that the Chinese, before they allowed their own people to start accumulating bullion, could easily have accumulated a figure like 20,000 tons.
Yeah.
Now, what it is today, I don't know. I've got no evidence, by the way, that figure is anywhere near correct. Mm-hmm. What I did was I went back to 1983. I looked at the 80s when there was a lot of inward investment going into China, which basically meant that China was getting a lot of dollars from people selling dollars to buy yuan to put up factories. The 90s, you then had the beginning of export surpluses developing, which again, the Chinese tried to suppress by intervening in the markets. They were buying dollars. So they were also, as part of that, obviously accumulating gold. So you can see that if you take into account all those capital movements from 1983 onwards, it is perfectly possible that a figure between 20 and 30,000 tons might have been accumulated. Where did it come from? We had a bear market. The Indians didn't start buying gold in any great quantity until after the repeal of the gold, there was a Gold Act which they repealed in 1992. So the Chinese had a pretty good run up before that even happened. The Arabs were stuffed up to the gills in gold. The Swiss banks, who were operating accounts on behalf of Arabs and others, were the largest holders of physical gold on behalf of their clients. They sold out pretty well by 1998, and the price of gold went down to around about $250. Even Britain sold most of her gold reserves at that time.
Sure.
So, there has been a lot of this stuff around, and it went somewhere.
Right.
Now, what's interesting, if we can put that to one side, is that Russia started in this game a lot later. She has been playing catch-up. Russia has been working very hard to accumulate physical gold reserves. Why? For fun? To decorate the palace in Leningrad? No, it is gold which is in the monetary reserves. I don't know if they've got other gold which is not declared in the monetary reserves. They may well have, but we'll put that argument to one side. So what we have is we have two countries which have been accumulating gold. And if my guesstimates on the Chinese numbers are right, then we're looking at a relatively modest rise in the price of gold. By modest, I'm talking about somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000 would be sufficient for those countries to link their currencies to gold. Now, the way in which they would do that, they have to do it for all comers. I mean, anyone who owns Chinese yuan, incidentally, all the sort of domestic currency and international currency, that has got to change. That goes into, quite simply, one set of yuan. That's it. It doesn't matter whether you're resident or not resident. So exchange controls go, and then anyone who owns yuan should have the ability to be able to redeem them for gold. So in order to control that, this is where you issue a bond. And the bond that I suggest is an irredeemable bond, by which I mean it's got no final redemption date. It has a coupon which is payable either in gold or in yuan at the owner of the bond's choice. So that, what it's effectively doing is it's giving a yield to gold. Now, this is not a new idea. It's a very, very old idea. Britain issued something called consolidated annuities, originally back in 1780, something like that. And it was the main mechanism by which we financed ourselves through the Napoleonic Wars. But what that meant was that the coupon on it, I think from memory, is something like 3%. But during the Napoleonic Wars, obviously, the yield on British government debt rose because there was a risk that we might lose, and not only that, but we were spending huge amounts of money. We needed a lot of money as a government in order to fight Napoleon. So the yield on this rose at that time to something around about 5.5%. In other words, the price dropped to around about 60% of its nominal value. So anyone who bought consols annuities at the height of the Napoleonic Wars found after the war, when peace returned, that he'd made a fortune. Now, this is deliberate because the whole point about the financing of that war was we needed to create the conditions for wealth to begin to accumulate in the private sector so that the government could pay down its debt over time. It would have the taxes, the income in order to do it, because guess what? The private sector is wealthy. And indeed, this gave a huge great impetus to the Industrial Revolution. And so you had some big families, like Sir Robert Peel and his family, you had David Ricardo, the stockbroker, you had the Rothschilds, and all the rest of it. They made millions. Yeah. And they used that to invest in factories, in production, cotton mills, and all the rest of it.
Sure.
Well, that was brilliant. Now, this is completely different from what we have in the West today. What we're doing is we're taking money away from people who've got wealth and squandering it. We're not encouraging people to get wealthy. No, we're taking it away from them. Right. In China, they're doing what we did back in the 19th century. They are encouraging people to become wealthy, and they have a very high savings rate. I mean, the savings rate is running at over 45% in China. And this is very different from here. So, consequently, you have exactly the conditions you need to issue a bond which gives you a yield which is tied to gold. Now, the yield, when you issue it, is probably going to be higher than the yield that you would get in the gold market, if you like, by leasing your gold or wherever it might be. Fine, absolutely. But what that will do is it will allow the Chinese as individuals to buy the bond and to hold it and to make money out of the principal value of the bond rising as the market adjusts to the whole thing. So, putting all this together, it seems to me that this is absolutely tailor-made for, if you like, turning the yuan and also the ruble into a gold-backed currency without having the risk of a run on the currencies.
Right. Yeah, it's fascinating. And first and foremost, as far as the 80s and 90s research, you're one of on the cutting edge that I've ever found that's done that research. So that's one of the, it's kudos to you for all, the researches you did for China gold flows during those decades. And as far as Russia and China are concerned, obviously today even we just saw a video clip of Putin getting one of the highest diplomatic honors from China, where literally it was a 1-minute little clip, and I'm going to splice it into this interview so people see it. But it's amazing to see the relationship budding between Russia and China. And if you start putting together the pieces, looking forward out to the 2020s and even the 2030s, you start to see a lot of rhyming and patterns that are similar to Waterloo and Britain in the 19th century. So it's definitely interesting times, and I found that article that you wrote to be great. I think it'll be proven to be very prescient, a lot of the points you made in probably 5, 6, 7 years. As far as a timeline, I know it's hard to pin that. What do you see? How do you see this unfolding in terms of time frame? Do you think it happens in the 2020s, or does it move into the 2030s?
I think the time frame is probably going to be determined by two things. Firstly, we have got the credit cycle, which I referred to earlier. And I think that credit cycle is likely to come into its crisis stage, believe it or not, towards the end of this year. It might be early in 2019. Now, the reason I say this is that interest rates are rising. In America, we can see that with the Fed funds rate. If you look at the declining peaks for the Fed funds rate over the last credit crises, the rate at which it had to rise in order to trigger the crisis, that was a series of declining peaks. If you just extrapolate that straight line to today, then we're looking at a Fed funds rate of no more than somewhere between 2 and 2.5%, potentially enough to trigger the next credit crisis. And now we're almost there. We're 1.7 or something. So we're not talking about very much in terms of further rise in interest rates. I'd go even further. If you look at the Eurozone, amazingly, the Eurozone economies are performing very well. They are moving into the later stages, if you like, of the credit cycle. Yet the ECB is still buying government bonds. doing QE, if you like,
Right.
it still has a negative deposit rate for the banks. It is completely wrong-footed. Now, I think one of the reasons it's wrong-footed is that if they start raising interest rates, then this is going to create difficulties for some banks' balance sheets, which are stuffed full of government bonds. It's also going to be unpopular with the governments who are borrowing to spend like crazy, like the Italians, like the Spanish, like the French,
Sure.
and all the rest of them. So you can see that it's almost as if the ECB is sort of sitting on top of a volcano trying to pretend it's not potting up.
And all this.
Now,
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
but what this means is that at some stage, it's going to blow.
Yeah.
And I think if I'm right about where we are in this credit cycle, it's going to blow very, very soon. And that's why I put a timeline on the credit cycle of towards the end of this year. At the very latest, I would expect it to be in the first quarter of next year. Now, there is another thing which is completely left field in this, and that is, I'm now sort of moving on towards the purchasing power of paper currencies. Now, we do know, and we've already discussed this, that as soon as we get the deflationary effects of credit deflation, the destruction of debt and all the rest of it, the implosion of bank balance sheets, the central banks will coordinate the most massive monetary expansion to stop it. I think we can take that as a given. The consequence of that is that the purchasing power of these currencies will begin to look really rather silly. You'll find that the purchasing power of any paper currency will start declining. It's not like last time. This is not something that the central banks can fine-tune and balance. No, it is not. Because the purchasing power of currencies is actually decided by you and me, not the central banks. That's an important point.
So so psychologically, that's going to be a breaking point, you feel?
Exactly. And forget monetarism. We're not talking monetarism. We're talking about fiat currencies, which exist on the full faith and credit of our government.
And so the faith and credit is going to be breaking.
Yeah. So it is actually quite simple. Yeah. It's that full faith and credit that people are going to be saying, hold on a minute. But then there's something coming completely left field, and that's cryptocurrencies. And what interests me about the cryptocurrencies is that cryptocurrencies have been through the first phase. Let me just backtrack slightly.
Sure.
Any bull market is comprised of three phases. You get the initial bull market, where the people who are really in the know, the very early guys, they're in there. Now, we've had that with cryptocurrencies. You then get a consolidation. We're having that. We may still be in it. We may be coming out of it. The second phase, the serious money starts getting involved. And we can see that because you can now buy a regulated future on COMEX in Bitcoin. So, it's gradually being incorporated into the regulatory system. And that is a process that's going to continue. Where are the extra Bitcoins going to come from? Yeah, it's being mined and all the rest of it, but basically it's going to, the supply isn't there for the potential demand. And then you have the final phase, which is when the public really get involved. This is an absolute surefire winner, etc., etc. Now, we're not there yet. But I think where we are is we're on the beginning of that second phase as cryptocurrencies get accepted as an alternative investment asset in a hedge fund portfolio and then perhaps in sort of broad mutual funds. Now, bearing in mind that on the credit crisis, we're likely to see ahead of the credit crisis equities peak, by the way, bond yields rise and all the rest of it, so that as far as an investing institution is concerned, there is nothing going up other than perhaps gold and silver, which none of them understand. Right. But you've got cryptocurrencies. These are going up. We better have some of these in order to get some performance into our dying portfolios. Right. So you can see that this is going to become potentially on the next credit crisis a disrupting factor. Yeah. Because on the credit crisis, what do? Do you buy property? Do you buy shares? Do you buy bonds? No. You run out and you buy something which is completely unrelated to the lot, and that's cryptocurrency. Yeah. So I can see a speculative bubble developing at the same time. That's going to change the dynamics of the whole thing, hugely. So going back to our dollars and euros and all the rest of it, they've got two competitors all of a sudden. There's not only gold and, its poorer cousin silver, but you've also got cryptocurrencies as well. Yeah. So, the ordinary person is going to be saying to themselves, well, there's not much point in me having a deposit in the bank. The bank has been rescued by the Fed, wonderful. But, the purchasing power of my deposits is going down and down and down all the time. Right. I think I better buy some cryptocurrencies. So you can see there is going to be the cryptocurrencies could be the key to the beginning of a run against paper currencies.
Yeah, there's 1,650 of them. So pick your whichever one you like. I mean, there's going to be some that I'm sure will go into some mania.
Yeah, absolutely. So getting back to gold. Now, if you're the Chinese state, if you're Mr. Xi and Mr. Putin, obviously getting together and worried about the way the West is going and exchanging the highest level of gold medal in terms of friendship, right. Then you can see that these guys have got to have a plan B. Right. And I think that's what they're doing. And that is going to give us the timing, which is your original question, or 10 minutes ago,
it's okay.
on when this gold-backed yuan and presumably a ruble will actually be introduced. Yeah. So I think it's going to be earlier rather than later. The sequence of events is that we're going to have the credit crisis first. It's going to begin to undermine the purchasing power of Western currencies, and at that stage, I think that the Asians need to jump in with new currency arrangements so they don't go down the tubes along with the rest of us.
Right. And just one other left field curveball just to throw out there. I mean, is the IMF SDR going to be involved in any way in your thoughts? Do you think that they'll eventually have a headquarters in Beijing, China in 2027, as Christine Lagarde once dreams? I mean, it's just another little sidewinder that you could throw in there if they're going to engage with them.
I mean, the answer, the SDR are a waste of bloody time. They really are. I mean, all they are is it's a package of paper currencies.
Right.
And believe it or not, under the rules, there cannot be gold in an SDR.
Right.
It is specifically excluded. Yeah. Now, Christine Lagarde can go and open an office in Beijing as much as she likes, but the SDRs will go down the tubes along with the paper currencies. Yeah. Quite simple.
Right. It's just a question of will it happen right away, or will they try and string along with some pseudo SDR system for a little while? But eventually, China ultimately, they want to set the prices of commodities. They know that they're gaining in wealth, and so the only question is how do they get from where they are right now with so much debt building up to further along the lines where all of a sudden they are actually dictating prices.
Well, yes, that's right, and I think there is. Sorry, I've lost the point. Okay. Yes. There is another reason why all these hairy schemes with SDRs and all the rest of it. And people are sort of talking about there's going to be a reset. No, and I'll tell you why. Governments need to print money. They're not going to cut their spending. Yeah. That's the last thing they're going to do. And they're going to need as much money as they are. So they will continue to impoverish their people in order that the state